In the annals of history, amidst the chaos and turmoil of ancient times, there emerged a school of thought that transcended the mundane struggles of human existence. Stoicism, with its roots in the philosophical gardens of Greece and Rome, stands as a beacon of wisdom, guiding us through the turbulent seas of life towards the shores of inner peace and virtuous living. Today, we embark on a journey, not merely to explore the tenets of Stoicism, but to embrace its profound teachings and unlock the latent potential within ourselves. As seekers of truth and wisdom, we are confronted with a world besieged by distractions and temptations, where the pursuit of material wealth and superficial pleasures often leads to inner turmoil and discontent. Yet, amidst this cacophony of chaos, Stoicism offers us a path to transcendence, to mastery, and to peak performance. At the heart of Stoicism lies the fundamental principle of virtue, the idea that true happiness and fulfillment can only be attained through the cultivation of moral excellence and the pursuit of wisdom. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle, as some things are within our control, and some things are not. Indeed, in a world fraught with uncertainty and adversity, Stoicism teaches us to focus our attention on that which we can control, our thoughts, our actions, and our attitudes, while relinquishing attachment to the outcomes beyond our influence. This philosophy of acceptance and equanimity empowers us to confront life's challenges with courage and resilience, transcending the grip of fear and anxiety that often paralyzes the human spirit. Consider the example of Marcus Aurelius, the revered Stoic emperor of Rome, who faced the tumultuous demands of ruling an empire with grace and fortitude. In his seminal work, Meditations, Marcus Aurelius reflects on the transience of life and the inevitability of hardship, yet he remains steadfast in his commitment to virtue and duty. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. These words echo through the corridors of time, reminding us that true greatness lies not in the pursuit of external accolades or recognition, but in the quiet dignity of living a life guided by principles of integrity and moral courage. The Stoic path to peak performance begins with the cultivation of mindfulness, a heightened awareness of the present moment and an unwavering commitment to living in accordance with our highest ideals. In a world consumed by distraction and sensory overload, Stoicism teaches us to cultivate a sense of inner stillness amidst the chaos, allowing us to discern truth from falsehood and wisdom from folly. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca aptly observed, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. In cultivating mindfulness, we learn to tame the restless fluctuations of the mind, freeing ourselves from the shackles of anxiety and doubt that inhibit our ability to perform at our best. But mindfulness alone is not enough. To achieve peak performance, we must also cultivate mastery, the disciplined pursuit of excellence in our chosen endeavors. Drawing inspiration from the Stoic concept of arete, or excellence of character, we strive to embody the highest ideals of human potential, transcending mediocrity and embracing the relentless pursuit of greatness. In his treatise on the nature of virtue, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminds us that virtue is the only good and that true fulfillment can only be attained through the cultivation of moral excellence. In the arena of life, we are called upon to confront our fears and insecurities, to embrace the challenges that test our resolve, and to emerge victorious in the crucible of adversity. The Stoic path to peak performance is not for the faint of heart. It requires courage, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to self-mastery. Yet, for those who dare to walk this path, the rewards are boundless, the exhilarating thrill of achieving our fullest potential, the profound satisfaction of living a life of purpose and meaning, and the enduring legacy of virtue that transcends the boundaries of time and space. In the words of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. Let us, then, rejoice in the boundless potential that lies within each of us, and let us embrace the Stoic path to peak performance with courage and conviction. As we embark on this journey together, let us remember that the true measure of success lies not in the attainment of external accolades or material wealth, but in the quiet dignity of living a life guided by principles of integrity, wisdom, and virtue. Let us strive, each day, to embody the timeless wisdom of the Stoics and to unleash the full potential of our human spirit. In the words of the Stoic philosopher Seneca, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. Let us, therefore, banish fear from our hearts and embrace the challenges that lie before us with courage and resilience. For it is in the crucible of adversity that our true character is forged, and it is through the pursuit of virtue that we achieve the highest heights of human potential. In conclusion, let us embrace the Stoic path to peak performance with open hearts and steadfast resolve. Let us cultivate mindfulness, mastery, and virtue in all that we do, and let us strive each day to live with courage, integrity, and purpose. For in the end, it is not the destination that matters, but the journey itself, the journey towards self-discovery, self-mastery, and the realization of our fullest potential as human beings. Together, let us walk the Stoic path to peak performance, and let us inspire others to join us on this noble quest. For in the pursuit of excellence, we find true fulfillment, and in the embrace of virtue, we discover the timeless wisdom that has guided humanity through the ages. Certainly, let's delve deeper into the Stoic philosophy, exploring additional references and insights to elucidate the path to peak performance. 1. Virtue as the highest good. Central to Stoic philosophy is the notion that virtue is the highest good, and that true happiness stems from living a life in accordance with moral excellence. This idea finds resonance in the works of contemporary Stoic scholars such as Massimo Pigliucci, author of How to be a Stoic, using ancient philosophy to live a modern life. Pigliucci emphasizes the importance of cultivating virtue as a means to navigate life's challenges and achieve inner tranquility. Drawing from the wisdom of ancient Stoic texts, Pigliucci elucidates the concept of eudaimonia, a state of flourishing that arises from living a life of virtue. He encourages readers to adopt Stoic practices such as the contemplation of adversity and the cultivation of gratitude as tools for fostering resilience and emotional well-being. 2. The dichotomy of control. Another cornerstone of Stoic philosophy is the dichotomy of control, the idea that there are certain things within our power and others that lie beyond our control. This concept is articulated by Epictetus in his Enchiridion, where he writes, "Some things are within our power, while others are not." This principle finds contemporary resonance in the field of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which draws heavily from Stoic philosophy. Psychologists such as Albert Ellis, the founder of Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, REBT, have integrated Stoic principles into their therapeutic approaches, emphasizing the importance of focusing on what is within our control and accepting what is not. 3. Acceptance and equanimity. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate acceptance and equanimity in the face of life's inevitable adversities. This idea is beautifully articulated by Sharon Labelle in her modern interpretation of Epictetus' Enchiridion, titled The Art of Living, the classical manual on virtue, happiness, and effectiveness. Labelle's rendition of Stoic wisdom emphasizes the importance of accepting external events with grace and equanimity, while focusing our efforts on cultivating inner virtue and moral excellence. She encourages readers to embrace the Stoic practice of the view from above, which involves adopting a broader perspective on life's challenges and recognizing the transience of earthly pursuits. 4. The Stoic leader. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in applying Stoic philosophy to leadership development. Authors such as Ryan Holiday, in his book The Obstacle is the Way, The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph, explore how Stoic principles can be applied to overcome adversity and achieve success in the realm of business and leadership. Holiday draws from the wisdom of Stoic leaders such as Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, demonstrating how their teachings can inform modern leadership practices. He emphasizes the importance of resilience, resourcefulness, and moral integrity in navigating the challenges of leadership, echoing the timeless wisdom of the Stoics. 5. Cultivating effective and virtuous leaders. Building upon these insights, contemporary leadership scholars have begun to explore new approaches that integrate Stoic philosophy to cultivate effective and virtuous leaders. Researchers such as Christopher Gill, in his work The Role of Stoicism in Leadership Development, examine how Stoic principles can enhance leadership effectiveness by fostering qualities such as resilience, integrity, and ethical decision-making. Gill argues that Stoicism provides a robust framework for leadership development, offering practical strategies for navigating complex challenges and inspiring others through moral example. By embracing Stoic virtues such as wisdom, courage, and justice, leaders can cultivate a culture of excellence and integrity within their organizations, fostering greater trust, resilience, and innovation. In conclusion, the Stoic path to peak performance offers profound insights into the nature of human flourishing and the pursuit of excellence. By embracing the virtues of wisdom, courage, and resilience, we can navigate life's challenges with grace and equanimity, achieving inner tranquility and fulfillment. Through the integration of Stoic principles into our daily lives and leadership practices, we can unlock our true potential and inspire others to do the same, forging a path towards a more virtuous and flourishing society.